All right, my title. That took me, I don't know how some of you write or record or put together thoughts. I'm one of these people, I like a title. And when I have a title, then I know where I'm focusing on. And it took me a while to figure this out. I knew that Becky had spoken about the pit. I knew that he eventually became a prince. And I knew he went to prison. And I thought, oh, there's a theme here with the P's. And so it went from pit to palace to prince, prison to prince. And so today we are going to specifically look at chapter 39. And what I've done is I'm going to have you listen to the scripture. For those of you who are familiar with online Bibles, there is Bible Gateway or Gateway Bible, but there's another one that's called Blue Letter Bible. Blue Letter Bible is one I've come to really like when I was teaching at MEI, and one of the reasons I liked it was because it has an audio version of books, but it has an audio version of the New Living Translation that's dramatized. And the first time I heard it was with Noah's Ark story, and it was really cool because you could hear the little hoof prints and the animals walking into the ark and stuff, so they had all these sound effects, and I went, oh, that just brings it to life. So today, we're going to listen to the story of Joseph. Whoops, we went the wrong way. And the scripture is from verses 1 to 23, and I think at this point I need to have Nate kick in and get that video or the audio link connected for me.
Israelite traders, he was purchased by Potiphar, a member of the personal staff of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Potiphar was the captain of the palace guard. The Lord was with Joseph and blessed him greatly as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. So Joseph naturally became quite a favorite with him. Potiphar soon put Joseph in charge of his entire household and entrusted him with all his business dealings. From the day Joseph was put in charge, the Lord began to bless Potiphar for Joseph's sake. All his household affairs began to run smoothly, and his crops and livestock flourished. So Potiphar gave Joseph complete administrative responsibility over everything he owned. With Joseph there, he didn't have a worry in the world, except to decide what he wanted to eat. Now Joseph was a very handsome and well-built young man, and about this time Potiphar's wife began to desire him and invited him to sleep with her. But Joseph refused.
Look,
he told her,
my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He has held back nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I ever do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God.
She kept putting pressure on him day after day, but he refused to sleep with her, and he kept out of her way as much as possible. One day, however, no one else was around when he was doing his work inside the house. She came and grabbed him by his shirt, demanding,
"Sleep with me."
Joseph tore himself away, but as he did, his shirt came off. She was left holding it as he ran from the house. When she saw that she had his shirt and that he had fled, she began screaming. Soon all the men around the place came running.
"My husband has brought this Hebrew slave here to insult us,"
she sobbed.
"He tried to rape me, but I screamed. He ran and left his shirt behind with me."
Ooh. I shouldn't hit that button. That's all right. He did that lovely piece, and I'm going to just... Is there a way to restart from where we left off? Do you know, Nate? No? Okay, that's all right. So I'm going to fix that problem because I shouldn't have hit the forward button. If you just give me a minute. And we go here. When she saw she had his shirt and that he had fled, she began screaming. That's the last part we heard. And she says, "My husband has brought this Hebrew slave here to insult us." She sobbed. "He tried to rape me, but I screamed, and he ran and left his shirt behind." She kept the shirt with her, and when her husband came home that night, she told him the story. "That Hebrew slave you've had around here tried to make a fool of me," she said. "I was saved only by my scream. He ran out, leaving his shirt behind." After hearing his wife's story, Potiphar was furious. He took Joseph and threw him into prison where the king's prisoners were held. But the Lord was with Joseph there too, and he granted Joseph favor with the chief jailer. Before long, the jailer put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and over everything that happened in the prison. The chief jailer had no more worries after that, because Joseph took care of everything. The Lord was with him, making everything run smoothly and successfully. Now, my plan is that you've heard the first version, which was the New Living Translation. So I'd like you to think about what you've just heard, and I'm going to read it again, but this time I'm going to read it in the Common English Version, which is the version that the Anabaptist Community Bible is written in. It's the Common English Bible version. And as you're listening to it a second time, I would like you to listen for things that strike you as either items that you have never noticed before, or things that catch your attention that you think, oh, wow, yeah, I remember that now because I haven't read it in a long time. So this is the version from the Common Version. When Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, Potiphar, Pharaoh's chief officer, the commander of the royal guard, and an Egyptian, purchased him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man and served in his Egyptian master's household. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and the Lord made everything he did successful. Potiphar thought highly of Joseph, and Joseph became his assistant. He appointed Joseph head of his household and put everything he had under Joseph's supervision. From the time he had appointed Joseph head of his household and of everything he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's household because of Joseph. The Lord blessed everything he had, both in the household and in the field, so he handed over everything he had to Joseph and didn't pay attention to anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. Sometime later, his master's wife became attracted to Joseph and said, "Sleep with me." He refused and said to his master's wife, "With me here, my master doesn't pay attention to anything in this household. He's put everything under my supervision. No one is greater than I am in this household, and he hasn't denied me anything except you, since you are his wife. How could I do this terrible thing and sin against God?" Every single day she tried to convince him, but he wouldn't agree to sleep with her or even to be with her. One day Joseph arrived at the house to do his work. None of the household's men were there. She grabbed his garment, saying, "Lie down with me." But he left his garment in her hands, and he ran outside. When she realized that he left his garment in her hands and run outside, she summoned the men of her house and said to them, "Look, my husband brought us a Hebrew to ridicule us. He came to lie down with me, but I screamed. When he heard me raise his voice and scream, he left his garment and went outside." She kept his garment with her until Joseph's master came home. And she told him the same thing. "The Hebrew slave whom you brought to us to ridicule me came to me, but when I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment with me and ran outside." When Joseph's master heard the thing that his wife told, "This is what your servant did to me," he was incensed. Joseph's master took him and threw him in prison, or in jail, the place where the king's prisoners were held. While he was in jail, the Lord was with Joseph and remained loyal to him. He caused the jail's commander to think highly of Joseph. The jail's commander put all of the prisoners in the jail under Joseph's supervision, and he was the one who determined everything that happened there. The jail's commander paid no attention to anything under Joseph's supervision because the Lord was with him and made everything he did successful. So whenever I'm doing a sermon and I'm trying to pull together ideas, and I think of them as stories, or as an English teacher, maybe how content is put together, the first thing I like to do is figure out a little bit about the context. Well, the context is this, the setting specifically, is when Joseph starts, if we follow way up here, there's a tiny little spot here in Hebron. That's where he starts his journey, and that's where Becky started where he was with his father, and his father told him to find the brothers and the sheep. So he's way up here, and he goes up, and he gets up to Shechem, and the brothers aren't there, and then he goes from Shechem to Dothan, which is over here. That journey, I was shocked to find out, is actually 65 miles. So Joseph did a whole lot of walking. That's a lot. Like when I think of walking 2 or 3 miles to go for 65 miles to find your brothers, and then only then at that point be thrown into a pit. So then he goes from there, and now we get a closer up look here. There's that Dothan city where he met his brothers. He sold to the Ishmaelites, and then eventually he ends up all the way down here in Egypt, just about between Ramses and just below there to the Goshen area. That journey is 650 miles. That's a lot of distance. So not only has Joseph been traveling a long distance, but you can tell that he has traveled through a number of countries. And in those spaces, the number of countries he's traveled through are also different cultures. So he has gone from his father's home, where he was being raised in a cultural norm that would have been good for him in that raising. Then he ends up with the Ishmaelites, and they would have their standards. And then he ends up with the Egyptians, traveling and ending up in a palace, in fact, Pharaoh's palace, because Potiphar is the head of the household there. So now I have a setting, and I understand that there's some cultural changes that have happened and some adaptations. The next thing I think about is that we often use in our English language, we talk about life being a roller coaster. I really think that Joseph's life was really a roller coaster. It was from a good environment to a not so good environment to a poor environment, and yet through all of that, we see God following him and being with him. So when I saw these pictures of the roller coaster, I thought, yeah, that's really that winding, meandering life that Joseph has. He starts his life out as a favorite son. Now, when I think of being somebody's favorite, that probably doesn't win you any favors with the people around you. When children in the classroom get to hear that they're teacher's pet, it usually sets them apart from the other children. And so if a parent has a favorite child, that puts that child in a very awkward position, and it did for Joseph. And we heard that story when Becky shared last week. We also know that Joseph was a young man who had a gift for dreaming. And so when he had these dreams last week, we know that he shared them with his family. And on one side, we say, yeah, you should share God's story. But on the other hand, was he wise to share that story when he was already the favorite son and knowing those pieces? So that sets character up for Joseph. We know that his journey away from his family, based on the points of reference in the history books and the storyline, is about 22 years, and that he spent 13 of them in slavery, and the rest he earned a lot of respect, and he was doing well because God was blessing him no matter where he was. The last sermon I did in May, I talked about a book called The Heavenly Man, and to me, that's another example of a man who lived like Joseph. He lived a life that was pure and honest, and he believed that God's steadfast love was with him regardless of where he was. He was in prison a lot of time, the heavenly man. And while he was there, God did miracles. Like, he didn't eat for 40 days and 40 nights. And yet he was alive. He had doors opened in the prison that he could just walk right out, and the guards don't even know why he walked out of the prison. Those are signs that God was with him. And God's signs to Joseph during this time were exactly the same, in the sense that Joseph had abundant things around him, and that the environment, the culture, the people that were there trusted him, or at least the people in power trusted him. When I think of stories, I think of stories with Joseph, and I think, what other pieces or characters or characteristics do I see? Well, this story of Joseph, even in this chapter alone, has a lot of these elements. And as I read them, I want you to quietly think to yourself, where in the story does Fran get these from, or where do they belong? So we have a story that has a hero. We have a story of a dysfunctional family where the love of parents, there's favoritism, and there's sibling rivalry. We have a story of kidnapping. We have a story of slavery. We have a story of loyalty. Loyalty from Joseph to God, but from God to his people. We have a story that has some discrimination in it. We have a story about integrity. We have a power struggle. We have wrongful incarceration. And in the weeks to come, we will see reconciliation as well. Now, let's take a closer look at the passage that we have. I've broken it down into verses 1 to 6. This is a scene, I believe, out of the movie from Joseph's story, where we have an image, at least, of Potiphar, and he was in a palace, a huge building, a huge home, where he was the head of the household. I think of houses and well-to-do people nowadays where they have maids and governors and all of that hierarchy within the system, but they're people that are employed. They are people that we don't perceive as slaves. We see them as employees of the well-to-do. And for me, it seems like Joseph almost earned his way, and eventually does earn his way into the status of an employee rather than just being a slave in that environment. One of the phrases that we see in the first few verses that is repeated is, "The Lord was with Joseph." And we hear that throughout this text, and I feel like it's a really important reminder that the Lord is with Fran, the Lord is with Deb, the Lord is with Joseph, always, right? And what I find really interesting is that Potiphar, it doesn't say anything about his faith, and yet Potiphar recognizes that the Lord is with Joseph. And he's not about to rock that ship. He says, you know what? God is with him, and I can trust him, and I don't have to even look over my shoulder to see what he's doing. He is doing what is good for me and my people. So Potiphar is pleased, and he puts him in charge of his whole household. We don't know whether Potiphar also assigned, like we know Joseph is told not, the only thing he has not got access to is the wife. But we don't know where the status is, whether the wife, in theory, is she above Joseph? Can she command him? Or is that kind of like a separate world and they're separated out? But we do know that that issue shows up a little bit later. So Joseph is doing well, and he's not about to lose trust with Potiphar, and he doesn't want to lose the faith and the steadfast love that he's received from the Lord. And then to reinforce that the Lord is with Joseph, we see the next phrase, the Lord began to bless Potiphar's household for Joseph's sake. So he didn't bless them because of Potiphar. All those blessings came because they were attached to Joseph. So if I was Potiphar, I sure wouldn't want to be losing Joseph anytime soon. So I kind of plant that seed in the back of my head and go, oh, okay, so Potiphar recognizes that Joseph is blessed. He knows that there is a God. He knows that God has blessed him and that his household is benefiting from that. So then we head towards the next verses 7 to 20, and that's where the biggest part of the story is consumed with the temptation that's placed before Joseph, but Joseph does not yield to it. Joseph says, no way, this is not happening. This is an example, and we've heard the Greek word for this before. Gareth introduced us to it some months ago in one of his sermons, and that steadfast love, the Greek word is hesed. And we see that hesed present in Joseph's life. This translation we have heard before, and it's actually found in both the Old and the New Testaments. And Joseph's steadfast love and God's steadfast love, I think we need to recognize that it's two ways. And then we move forward. Joseph is solid on his reply, and he stays away from her cunning ways. And he's clear to say, I'm not crossing your husband, and I'm definitely not going to sin against God. In this section, there's some phrases that caught my attention, and as I did some more reading, it made me wonder whether or not there were some other things underlying this conflict between Joseph and the Mrs. Potiphar. And before I go further, don't forget, in our text, in the New Living Translation, in the CEB versions, we don't get a name for the wife. John gave you her name, and when I did the research on that, it's interesting. It's found in the Jewish versions, and it's also found in the Islamic versions. But it's not found in ours, and I kind of like that. I kind of like that she's not named, because when you name somebody, they get more importance. When they don't have a name, it minimizes them. And so for me, knowing her as Potiphar's wife is just fine, because I don't need to remember her. What I want to remember is Joseph and his steadfast love. So we know that she accuses him to the household slaves, and she accuses him to her husband that they've brought in this Hebrew. So he's Hebrew, but he's living in Egypt. Is that one of the first times that we encounter discrimination? Where specifically she is saying that because of who he is, his cultural background, this is why he's behaving that way. And I can think of a lot of times and circumstances where we may have made those same kinds of statements. Oh, because they are like this. Or because they're in poverty, they behave this way. And she was doing that. She was saying that he's Hebrew, and he's making a fool of me. Well, I had to chuckle because I'm thinking, where in the story does Joseph make her look like a fool? He doesn't make her look like a fool. She does that all by her lonesome self. But that point is that she's trying to blame him. The other piece in this story that caught my attention was whether or not this is the first or one of the first times that we encounter a power struggle between an employer and an employee. We know that in modern day we talk about sexual harassment, we talk about harassment of any kind in the employee's world, where there's somebody who is in a position of power, so a manager, over employees. There are certain things we can say or cannot say and do anymore because we are at an advantage over the employees. So is Potiphar's wife using that power throne that she's on to basically tell Joseph, you have to do this, and he's saying no. So has she got her feathers all ruffled because there is this employee who did not do her bidding? So for me, this was just a new way to look at this part of the story, rather than looking at her as presenting this sexual object or the sexual connotations that come with that dialogue. Was she struggling with the evils of discrimination and power? Now, Potiphar is an interesting character. When he hears the story, he's furious at Joseph. But what's interesting is that in the context of that world, if any husband had had that complaint heard that from his wife, they could have executed Joseph right then and there, and they did not. Potiphar chooses to throw him into the king's prison. And the people that are in the king's prison are prisoners who have been accused of doing things against the king. So my question to myself and to you is, why did Potiphar show grace to Joseph at this point? Was he showing Joseph grace because he didn't want to lose his wealth? Was he showing grace to Joseph because he recognized that he couldn't trust his wife's story? Or did he throw him in jail because it was the least of two evils and he actually did believe Joseph and saw the goodness in Joseph in the story and the fact that God was with him? For me, one of the verses in the New Testament that stands out is the the verse is Colossians chapter 3. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. And I can't think of anyone that epitomizes that better than Joseph. And for me, this story and this verse really relate to a story that I have to share with you. That I was teaching a student, and the student was from Chilliwack, and this young lad had a physical disability. He had a deformation to his ears and his hearing and to his face, and he really struggled. He struggled with it as a teen, and he struggled with the peers in terms of how they saw him. He had a really good circle of friends, and as a typical teenager in about grade 8 and 9, he started to rebel against doing things for schoolwork, and it was kind of like, well, I'm not doing that, and as if it was going to hurt the teacher or his parents. And I heard his mom talking to this young lad, and it has stuck with me since then. Her words to him were, "Don't do your homework for the teacher. Don't do your homework for me, Mom. Do your homework as if you're doing it for God. Do everything you do," she said to her son, "for God. Do it for Him. That makes more sense than doing it for the teacher." And I've always had those words kind of ring through in my head since that. And I think Joseph did exactly that. He did everything he did for God. So now we see a phrase again that showed up in the first 6 verses. But the Lord was with Joseph in prison, and the guard recognized it, the head of the guards, and they turned around and made him head of the prisoners. And again, the warden of the jail said he didn't have to worry about anything happening in jail because the Lord was with Joseph. And everything that Joseph did was golden. It was good. My question to you is, do we always recognize that God is with us no matter where we are? I wonder if Joseph was like me. I sit and think, was Joseph like me? Because I sure would have been wondering whether God was with me. I'm sitting in jail. I'm sitting in a pit where my brothers have thrown me. I'm sitting in a slave camp. God, where are you? Are you really with me? And I know we can't answer that for Joseph, but my question still is, was Joseph like me, or was he that steadfast and knew that God was with him always? Sometimes in life we are put in those situations that we're not of our own doing. And we know that God is always with us, but sometimes we really struggle to remain faithful, to be able to see God's purpose in what is happening. And so I just encourage you to think about Joseph's circumstance and remember that he's always with you. As we close, just a couple of things to wrap up. Before I wrap up, there are some highlights that I'd like to share with you that are related to, I call it repetition. And I'm going to, because I'm pretty sure I have that. Oh, I don't have that slide. Nope, I don't. I just have it on my screen. Okay. In the text from verses 1 to 23, we have a repetition of what happens to Joseph in terms of the Lord is with us, or the Lord is with Joseph. We have a repetition of the lines that the staff, we have no worries because Joseph is in charge. We have repetition of his cloak, his brother, the cloak his father made being ripped off him, and the cloak being ripped off of him by Potiphar's wife. We have the repetition of God's steadfast love for him. We have repetition in lies and in unfaithful stories getting Joseph in trouble, so not of his own doing. And we have that repetition of God always being there. As I conclude, I'd like to end with a poem. It's one of my favorite books. It's called Footprints by Margaret Fishback Powers, who's the actual lady who wrote the book, wrote the poem. And at the back of the book, she also has a number of Bible verses that relate to with God is with us always. Footprints. One night, I dreamed a dream. I was walking along the beach with my Lord. Across the dark sky flashed scenes from my life. For each scene, I noticed 2 sets of footprints in the sand, one belonging to me and one to my Lord. When the last scene of my life shot before me, I looked back at the footprints in the sand, and to my surprise, I noticed that many times along the path of my life, there was only 1 set of footprints. I realized that this was at the lowest and saddest times of my life. This always bothered me, and I questioned the Lord about my dilemma. Lord, you told me when I decided to follow you, you would walk and talk with me all the way. But I'm aware that during my most troublesome times in my life, there was only 1 set of footprints. I just don't understand why, when I needed you most, you would leave me. He whispered, my precious child, I love you and will never leave you. Never ever during your trials and testing. When you saw only 1 set of footprints, it was then that I carried you. Then when I flip to one of the last sections in her book called God is with us always, here's just a few verses for us to hang on to for the week. Hebrews 13, verse 5, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. Deuteronomy 31, verse 8, the Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Matthew 28, verse 20. Jesus said, surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. Psalm 9, verse 10. Those who know your name will trust in you, for you, Lord, have never forsaken those who seek you. And one more verse, Deuteronomy 31, verse 6. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Remember, God is always with you, and his steadfast love remains. Amen.